Good day, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Let me start by saying a few words about our topic. As you can see on the screen, our topic is all about ethics. And now, I will pass it on to the first reporter.
So, first, let's go to ethics. Ethics investigates the philosophical foundation for our moral judgments in order to comprehend what is ethically or right or wrong, just or unjust. In a broader sense, this takes into account how individuals relate to one another and the natural world, as well as their own freedom, responsibility, and sense of justice. So, what is ethics? Ethics is the study, or sometimes known as moral philosophy, is a subject of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and endorsing conceptions of good and bad behavior. Astrology, the branch of philosophy that these two areas make up, is concerned with problems of worth. So by defining ideas like good and evil, right and wrong, virtue and vice, justice and crime, and so on, ethics attempts to answer issues about human morality. As an area of academic study, moral philosophy is connected to the areas of moral psychology, descriptive ethics, and value theory. So next we go to metaethics. So what is metaethics? Metaethics is the study of moral thought and moral language rather than addressing questions about what practice or right and wrong, and what our obligation to other people or future generations are question of so-called normative ethics, metaethics, as what the morality actually is. So metaethics is a naturalism, non-naturalism, emotivism, and prescriptivism are important metaethical ideas. Both naturalists and non-naturalists concur that moral language has a cognitive component, meaning that moral assertions may be known to be true or untrue. So, on how to go about doing this, knowing however they differ. According to naturalists, these assertions may either be sufficiently supported by deriving arguments only from non-moral words, or moral conceptions themselves can be defined in terms of non-moral terms. Both of these ideas are rejected by intuitionists who maintain the moral concepts are sui generis and that moral claims are independent in their logical standing. Moral utterances are not cognitive, according to emotivists who assert that they are only emotional expressions or of acceptance or disapproval. Thus, the essence of moral reasoning and justification must be emotional. So let's proceed to cognitivism. Cognitivism believe that humans learn from thinking. They believe that we learn from experiences and that is considered an eternal process rather than a product. So cognitivism is a theoretical approach to understanding the mind and psychology that gained popularity in 1950s. It was a reaction to behaviorism, which cognitivists claimed failed to adequately explain cognition. The term cognitive psychology comes from the Latin cognoscere, which means to know and information, making it an information processing by psychology that has roots in previous traditions of the study of cognition and problem solving. So, thinking was accepted by behaviorists. They classified it as a behavior. According to cognitivists, thinking cannot be an action in and of itself since it affects how individuals act. Later, cognitivists claim that since thinking is crucial to psychology, it should be studied separately. Yet, cognitivists frequently assume a particular type of thinking. So let's proceed to non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivism is the meta-ethical view that ethical sentences do not express proposition and thus cannot be true or false. A non-cognitivist denies that The cognitivists claim that moral judgments are capable of being objective true because they describe some feature of the world. So, non-cognitivism is the meta-ethical perspective known as non-cognitivism holds the ethical sentences cannot be true or untrue since they do not convey proposition. Non-cognitivism suggests that moral knowledge is impossible since moral assertions cannot be true, and if one cannot know something that is not true, a cognitivist asserts that moral judgments can be objectively true because they describe some aspect of the universe. Although recognizing that its surface aspects may consistently and effectively function as if no moral discourse were cognitive, non-cognitivism implies that cognitive attitudes underlying moral discourse and that this discourse consequently comprises of non-declarative speech acts. It is important to clarify what moral assertions signify if they are to be interpreted as non-declarative speech acts. So let's proceed to the last one. Applied ethics refers to the practical aspects of moral consideration. It is ethics with respect to the real world action is and their moral consideration in the areas of private and public life, the profession, health, technology, law, and leadership. So the term applied ethic describes the application of moral principles. For instance, the bioethics community is concerned with determining the proper approach to moral issues in the life sciences, such as euthanasia, the allocation of limited health resources, or the use of human embryos in research. Environmental ethics is concerned with ecological issue. It is ethics with respect to real-world action and the real moral considerations in the areas of private and public life, the professions, health, technology, law, and leadership. Thank you. Please, next reporter.
First, John Stuart Mill combined economics with philosophy. He believed a moral theory called utilitarianism, that actions that lead to people's happiness are right and that those that lead to suffering are wrong. Among economists, he is best known for his 1848 work, Principles of Political Economy, became a leading economic textbook for decades after its publication. The basic principle of Mill's utilitarianism is the greatest happiness principles. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. He also argues that happiness is the sole basis of morality and that people never desire anything but happiness. Second, Immanuel Kant. One of Kant's greatest contributions to philosophy was his moral theory, deontology, which judges actions according to whether they adhere to a valid rule rather than the outcome of the action. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher and one of the foremost thinkers of the Enlightenment. His comprehensive and systemic work in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, ethics, and aesthetics greatly influenced all subsequent philosophy, especially the various schools of Kantianism and idealism. Kant was a prolific writer, and his best-known works are three critiques: The Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, The Critique of Practical Reason, 1788, and The Critique of Judgment, 1790. Third, Jeremy Bentham, a moral theory that argues that actions should be judged right or wrong to extend the increase or decrease human well-being or utility. He advocated that if the consequences of an action are good, then the action is moral, and if the consequences are bad, the act is immoral. Fourth, Aristotle emphasized that virtue is practical, and the purpose of ethics is to become good, not merely to know. Aristotle also claims that the right course of action depends upon the details of a particular situation, rather than being generated merely by applying a law. For him, virtue is not itself a habit. Habituation is merely an aid to the development of virtue. But true virtue requires choice, understanding, and knowledge. And the last one, David Hume, is famous for the elegance of his prose, for his radical empiricism, for his skepticism of religion, for his critical account of causation, for his naturalistic theory of mind. He also made important contributions to aesthetic theory, with his view that there is a uniform standard of taste within human nature. In political theory, with his critique of social constructionism, and economic theory with his anti-mercantilist views.
So the next is the number 3. Number 3, as a BEd teacher, how are you going to teach being ethical to students? Cite 5 examples. First, and the foremost is to act an ethical person, used to lead by example. Example number 1, ethical teacher is guided by a set of beliefs that leads attitudes and action focus on what best for student. Being ethical means taking the higher read and behaving professionally in the midst of big issues as well as in everyday decision making in the classroom. So, number 2, have a student practice ethics inside the classroom in hope that they will execute this just in a classroom as well. So, example number 2, as many says, practice makes perfect. Practice is also the first step closer into achieving the finish line or a certain goals. The goals is to be an ethical person. For that, one must put into practice to further develop an ethical manners. It is also more reliable when under the guidance of an ethical person or teachers. So the number 3, have the student do homework listing out the ethical action they have done in the community. Example number 3, maybe through this homework will the student experience and realize that it failed to be an ethical person as a self that everyone would be comfortable and happy with instead being disliked. It is more happier when you are not alone. Next is the number 4, present or telling a real life situation, hoping that this will inspire the student and motivate them. Then the example of number 4 is lesson alone is not get to your student. For them, it is just an only words. But students can still be attached to things that they can relate to. Talking to them as a person to person, they will ease them out the atmosphere between the teacher and the student. Most student doesn't view teachers in a good light. Needless to say, there's a chance to get through to your student through experiencing some real life situation. And lastly, the example number 5. Encourage and build confidence to your student. This will help them speak up. Then the example is, some students are too much kind that sometimes they are slowly turned into pushover. They usually lacks that they will to speak up their thoughts. The teachers wouldn't want their student to cower. Instead, teachers will be proud to see them student to stand up high and high. There will be times students will encounter difficulties and they must face it on their own, so it is better to teach them to stand up for themselves in preparation. So that's the number 3. Next, reporter please.
And now let us proceed to the question number 4, which is how are you going to differentiate the rightness and wrongness of the human acts to your students? So, right means following the set of rules and regulation that have been set by the governing nation, which a person is fair, just, and accurate. By wrong is basically the opposites of right. It is everything that is against laws, ethics, and moral, and many more to mention. The moral standards that decide whether a specific act or activity is rightness or moral are known as ethics, that holds that moral correctness or incorrectness of deeds should be determined in terms of the deed's effects, in which every human action is aimed towards the purpose of doing and achieving something good in order to live a happy life. So, as a teacher of the classroom, we set our rules like does and don't and equal treatment, balance learning, and provide widely knowledge that can make them better of the students. So, about rightness is a compound of group or individual ethics or moral behavior or characteristic like fairness and core values that were united with positive collaboration and communication of the students. And the wrongness is a bad habit which they are performing a gambling, legal against the school prosperity, lack of discipline or guideline, making a nonsense or posting or writing a bad image or judgment, or bullying. In differentiate each of the human actions of the students will disregard the proper development of learning structure which is building together positive environment, equal rules that make it sense. So teacher will do a multitasking providers which you can see what students do inside. Pay their attention of the class, always your eye to them, make a rules with good intentions, provide more intelligent skills that can be more independent and to make them inspired by what others do not by competitive with others' performance. Always be fair at all. Look what they need to patch and don't be messy. Be active always. Don't allow the students will underdog with someone. Make a peaceful environment friendly approach which they feel the love and care that makes them comfortable and inspired by what are done and achieved.